Summer is here. So why have so many clueless strangers on the internet been telling the Church of Satan to build a school? Satanic Holidays and Satanic Schooling today on Satansplain.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain, Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Welcome to Satansplain. When I record these episodes, I sometimes make the assumption that a lot of the listeners are already Satanists, already familiar with Satanism, that they already know the Satanism 101 stuff, but I realize that might not be the case for everybody. It's good to do some of the Satanism 101 stuff, so I want to talk briefly about the topic of Satanic Holidays. First, because I think this is a topic worth touching on, and second, as you'll see, it will segue nicely into the next topic, which is going to be schooling. So, Satanic Holidays. There is an entire chapter on this topic in the Satanic Bible by Anton Szandor LaVey. And again, most of you listeners, I'm sure, already know what it says. The most important holiday in Satanism is, of course, the date of one's own birth. Satanism is a religion of the self, of the ego, and not the collective, so it makes perfect sense that the most important satanic holiday would be your own birthday. After that, in Satanism, we make use of Halloween, not Samhain or Samhain as some pronounce it, but Halloween. See, we're not into it for the earth and the harvesting and that sort of stuff, but for the dark reputation that the holiday has. As Satanists, we take that and we make it work for us. And we do the same with Walpurgisnacht on April 30th. The Satanic Bible goes into some detail about this holiday, its history, how it got its name, and so on. But it adds at, the bottom line is that much like Halloween, Walpurgisnacht has simply ended up having a strong association with witchcraft and demons and all that other fun, mythological, spooky stuff. So once again, we take that stigma and make it work for us. Now, the chapter goes on to explain that after all of these aforementioned holidays, you have the solstices and the equinoxes. Whether you as a Satanist decide to do anything on these days, well, that's entirely up to you. But I have seen some ask, what is the satanic significance to these calendar dates? Like the solstices and the equinoxes. Well, personally, I would say the reasons are twofold. First of all, these days are based on where the planet is actually positioned as it makes its trip around the sun and the seasons change. As we say in Satanic Statement number 2, Satan represents vital existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams. So the earth, the sun, the change in the seasons, not to mention all the farming and the hunting and commerce that humans have based off of these changes, well, let alone what animals have done. I mean, these are all real events. They are not holidays marking the birth of somebody you've never met, or the day somebody was supposedly resurrected, or when a supposed miracle happened, or anything like that. And this brings me to what I think is the second significance of these days. One of the 9 satanic sins, remember, is forgetfulness of past orthodoxies. It's understood now that a lot of holidays from Christianity and other spiritual religions have their roots in the older pagan celebrations of the solstices and the equinoxes. So it's a reminder that these orthodoxies, these holy days of Christianity and other popular spiritual religions, have pagan DNA, to quote a bumper sticker. And the most recent of these holidays at the time of this recording was the summer solstice. That was just last week. And as usual, when the equinoxes and solstices happen, the Church of Satan sends out a little write-up on their news feed. And again, as a Satanist, you're not obligated to do anything celebratory on these days, but I enjoy reading a little announcement about the day, a satanic take on the day with maybe some trivia. And to read you a little of what the Church of Satan wrote this year, they have a photo, and underneath, "From our garden here at the Black House, pictured is the thriving smoke tree planted in tribute to Magister Joe Netherworld. We offer solstice greetings to all in harmony with the Earth's seasonal changes. It is always a delight to celebrate the glories of nature and the abundant pleasures that life offers. Here's to a splendid new season filled with indulgences galore. And they also present some clips of the pastoral piece from Beethoven, some evocative music to capture the essence of summer. So I'm seeing this link to this announcement on Twitter. The Church of Satan posts a tweet with the link, and in the replies to that tweet, I read somebody saying, "Oh my God, Church of Satan, you need to make a Church of Satan school in the state of Maine." And understandably, my thought is, what the hell does this have to do with summer? In fact, one of the things people celebrate in summer is that there's no school. And on a side note, happy 50th anniversary to the Alice Cooper song, School's Out. Great album. It's like he sang School's Out for summer. By the way, happy 50th anniversary also to Class Clown, the George Carlin album. I look at that album and some other works of George Carlin over on my other podcast, The Devil's Mischief on Radio Free Satan. There it is, a little plug from my other podcast, The Devil's Mischief. Anyway, back to Satansplain. But yes, this brings me to the topic of schools. I see replies from people like that idiot about schools telling the Church of Satan to build a school. Then on another thread, I see another, and another, and another. So I had to stop and read up on what the hell this was all about. Let's start with the clickbait version of the story. Well, it goes something like this. Here in the United States, it's believed that we have the separation of church and state. The state includes things that are funded by the state, that is by the government, which means by taxes, the tax dollars of citizens, and that includes public schools. One thing you cannot do is endorse a particular religion in schools, because then you're using my tax dollars to support a religion I don't agree with. News sources were saying that a law was passed so that now at least one of the 50 states could use taxpayer dollars for religious schools. And now you have random people on Twitter saying, "Oh, Church of Satan, you should totally make a Satanism school now that this law is in effect." Okay, let's back up here. There's a lot to unpack. Like I said, what I gave you is essentially the clickbait version, the sensationalist version, but to find out what's really going on here, you have to read beyond the headlines. Oh, and before I go any further, I am not a lawyer. Don't take this episode for legal advice, blah, 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 disclaimers, and so on. For those of you who do not live in the United States and don't know, well, I'm going to try to give you some, kind of like a civics 101 lesson here. We have laws at both the state level as well as the federal level, the country level. We have constitutional rights that are spelled out in our country's constitution. We likewise have federal laws, but we also have a lot of state laws that change from state to state. That's because we're the United States. We're a country made up of separate states, all different sizes, different populations, different climates, different industries, different subcultures. So we leave it up to each state to vote for which laws they want for their state. So the traffic laws are a good example. Seatbelt laws. Do you have to be wearing a seatbelt while you drive on the highway? Or how old do you have to be before you can get a driver's license? What are the exact punishments if you're caught drunk driving? So those sorts of things vary from state to state. So states have their different laws that they create, and there are cases, of course, where whether somebody really broke the law may be questionable, and that's what courts are for. You have a right to defend yourself in a court of law if you're accused of a crime, innocent until proven guilty. Now, one thing a state cannot do is create or enforce a law that goes against a federal law, or namely, a law that goes against your constitutional rights. And this is where the highest court in the United States, the Supreme Court, comes into play. Throughout the years, there have been times where a state law or other sort of local law was being enforced on a citizen. The citizen claimed that the law was violating his constitutional rights, and up it went through the court system until the Supreme Court made a final decision on whether or not it was really a violation of the Constitution. One of the rights protected by the Constitution is freedom of religion. In fact, it's the first one listed. The First Amendment to the Constitution says, among other things, that Congress can make no law, quote, respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Back in 1963, for example, there was a case, Sherbert versus Werner, where a woman was a Seventh-day Adventist, and it was against her religion to work on a Saturday. Her employer suddenly started requiring employees to work on Saturday. She refused, so she was fired without compensation, couldn't get unemployment benefits. So eventually this case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was decided that her constitutional rights were in violation, and so they ruled in her favor. And freedom of religion also includes freedom from religion. It's kind of a cliche phrase, but it's still true. For example, back in 1961, there was a case called Torcaso versus Watkins. The state of Maryland had a law in the books which said that if you serve public office, you have to declare a belief in the existence of God. That went to the Supreme Court, and it was ruled as unconstitutional, because atheists should be able to run for office if they want. When it comes to public schooling and religion, this is where you need a little more clarity. You have Christian zealots on the political far right who claim that their Jesus used to be taught in the schools, and now it's been taken out and students aren't allowed to pray anymore. And that's not exactly true. You can have religion in public schools as long as the school isn't necessarily endorsing that religion. Or, if they're endorsing one, they're endorsing a lot, or all of them. You're not being exclusionary. And also not including people who may not want to be included. So if a Christian student wants to pray in between classes or, just before an exam, whatever, they can do that as long as they're not disrupting people. What you can't do is have a teacher lead a whole class in prayer. Because again, you're including people who may not wish to be included. There was yet another court case in the news recently about a football coach at a public school who was praying after games. Again, it's hard to sift through the clickbait and get to the real story. As far as I could understand it, though, it was after the game. He was doing it, and students didn't have to participate if they didn't want to. So the court ruled that forcing him to not do that was a violation of his religious rights. And that's what happened there, again, from what I could gather. Now, can a teacher teach the Bible in a public school? Well, if you use a Bible story in an English literature class to illustrate a story point as a way to talk about poetry or metaphors, yeah, you can get away with that. If you're going to use it to teach theology, like you're dictating that in class, then no. If a teacher is offering to teach the Bible as an elective course, something that other students may opt to take but isn't required for anybody else, that's okay. Having said all of that, if you are a privately funded school, none of these restrictions really apply because you're essentially not using anybody's tax dollars to fund your religious endeavor, so you have the freedom to create a school like that. One place where this gets a little sticky, though, is in the state of Maine. Maine, like all states, has both public and private schools, but it also has a lot of isolated rural regions. One source I read says that over half of the school districts do not have their own public high school, essentially. There are about 5,000 teenagers in the state who live in a town, or district rather, that just doesn't have their own secondary school. No high school, no middle school. But the law says you have to provide them the opportunity for public schooling. So what are the options? Well, maybe they could go to a small private school, but then the family would have to pay tuition on that on their own. So you're not really getting the school for free like the public school students get. The only other option, it would seem, is to take them to the nearest district that does have a public school. But whether the school bus would be willing to go that distance, that's another issue. And gas isn't cheap these days. And besides, the school might say, well, why should we have to spend the extra part of our budget and resources to support a student who's not even from this town? So to get around this problem, Maine offers a school voucher program. As I understand it, it goes something like this. If you're in one of these isolated places that doesn't have its own local school. The government will give you a voucher, and then you can use that voucher to help pay for whatever school you would like to go to, whether it's a local private school or a public school in another district. You give that voucher to your school, and the school gets money from the government on what would normally go to your education in a local public school, if your town actually had one. It seems, though, that this voucher program was only allowed to schools that were not religious, because again, the argument is, well, you can't use public funds to endorse a religion. So here are some details I got online. In 2018, 3 sets of parents filed a complaint in U.S. District Court against the state, alleging that the program requirement infringed on their First Amendment rights, including the free exercise of religion. The District Court entered judgment in favor of the state. The parents appealed. The appeal still ruled in favor of the state. The question then became, quote, does a state violate the religion clauses or equal protection clause of the United States Constitution by prohibiting students participating in an otherwise generally available student aid program from choosing to use their aid to attend schools that provide religious or sectarian instruction? As a question of constitutional violation, it went to the Supreme Court, and they ruled that, yes, it is unconstitutional for that reason. These vouchers weren't going directly to a school. It was the state giving the benefit to the student, and it was up to them where they wanted to redeem it and go to school. So that was what that was all about. But of course, you have people in the clickbait news on both extremes distilling it down to something either, hooray, great victory for Jesus, prayer is back in school, or conversely, oh no, taxes are going to Christian schools, it's the end of separation of church and state, we're doomed. Again, it doesn't really strike me as either. I mean, obviously I'm no fan of Christianity, but this is not an event I'm losing sleep over. I mean, if some teenager lives in the middle of the sticks and would rather spend 4 years going to the private parochial school 2 miles away rather than to the public school that's 20 miles away, and the state is ready to fund some of that bill, then so be it. It's not like the state said, you have to go here, or they said, we're going to give this school extra money no matter who goes there. But alas, all over Twitter, I've been seeing one person after another tagging the Church of Satan and all tweeting what they think is the most brilliant joke. Hey, now that the state is paying religious schools, the Church of Satan should set up a satanic school. Or people saying, well, you holy rollers may be dancing in victory now, but what are you going to do when the Church of Satan sets up a Satanism school? Now, the idiots who are making this joke, are they Satanists? No. Do they live in Maine? No, probably not, for the most part. Do they even have kids? I would go out on a limb and guess that in most cases, no, they don't. So why would they be asking us to make some sort of school for a religion that they don't share in a state they don't live in for kids that aren't theirs? Well, it seems kind of obvious to me why they would make this request. They just find the whole idea of it amusing. They find it entertaining. And whether it's something we would actually want to do or find feasible, well, that's irrelevant to them. Magus Peter H. Gilmore wrote a great essay which you can find on churchofsatan.com. It's an essay titled, Let's You and Him Fight. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I would like to read one paragraph from it. The article says, quote, some atheists seem quite pleased by such actions, since they take the attitude that it is fun to watch self-proclaimed Satanists mud wrestling with Christians in a vain attempt at self-promotion in forums which, by all rights, should maintain religious neutrality. Anton LaVey noticed the title of the Popeye cartoon from 1934, Let's You and Him Fight, in discussing this position, agitating a conflict but then stepping back to observe the fisticuffs between others that have been promoted. One then enjoys the brawl but remains free of injury, or any other responsibility, as the crowd probably didn't catch the instigator's overture, but just gathered to watch when the actual fight broke out. The Satanist is supposed to be savvy to such tactics and should avoid being manipulated in this manner. So, as we keep responding to these dweebs online, no, we're not going to build a Church of Satan school just for your amusement. We're not going to let you use us and our religion as some sort of stupid political punchline. And if nobody was asking us, we still wouldn't do it, because it just would make no sense within the context of Satanism. We're very upfront about the fact that this is not a religion for the masses, that not just anybody can be a Satanist, that we're against the indoctrination of children, so it inherently makes no sense. Plus, have any of these dorks stopped for a moment and even thought through any of the logistics of it all? I mean, let's say we collected a huge amount of money to build a satanic high school in Maine. So we get a building, we get a staff, we get a football field, we get desks, books, and all that stuff. And we put it in Maine on the off chance that somebody living in Maine might not have the option of going to a local high school. And then and only then, if we actually find parents who are residents of Maine and want to send their child to a Satan school for 4 years, and they live so far away that they're actually eligible for the voucher, then we get some money from the state for having enrolled that student. Again, what would we possibly get out of that whole thing? We might piss off a couple of Catholic schools out in the middle of nowhere. Okay. We get to be the next amusing clickbait headline for a day to entertain those people on Twitter requesting it. Okay, but those aren't good enough reasons. In the previous episode of Satansplain, I talked about The Third Side, an essay by Anton LaVey, and I would say there's a third side to school questions like this too. Ironically, one which religious people have overwhelmingly preferred, and more are preferring now. I'm going to take a break right now. You are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
In 1966, Anton LaVey created the Church of Satan, marking the beginning of the Age of Fire and Year 1 Anno Satanas. In 1969, he published the Satanic Bible, codifying Satanism as a religion, the first time it's been done in human history.
In the name of Satan, ruler of the earth, king of hell, come forth from the pit, bestow the blessings of hell upon us. For we are your children, and we invoke thee this night.
In 2001, I was appointed High Priest of the Church of Satan. In 2007, I published the Satanic Scriptures, further defining and expanding on satanic philosophy and greater magic ritual.
Hail, Satan full of might! Hail, Satan full of might! Our allegiance is with thee! Our allegiance is with thee! Cursed are they! Cursed are they! The God adorers! The God adorers! And cursed are the worshippers! And cursed are the worshippers! Of the Nazarene eunuch! Of the Nazarene eunuch!
For the past 50 years, the Church of Satan has stood as the sole organization to define and defend Satanism as a religion. And though pretenders to the infernal throne have come and gone, we have stood the test of time and will into the future. Visit churchofsatan.com for more information and read the Satanic Bible and the Satanic Scriptures. Knowledge is the solution for ignorance. Hail, Satan!
Hail, Satan! Hail, Satan!
You are listening to Satansplain. Visit the official website of the show, satansplain.com. The website is your ultimate go-to source for all things Satansplain. You can listen to the show there, but of course there are many other ways to listen to Satansplain. We're on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and so on. For the latest news on Satansplain, you can go to the show's Facebook page or Twitter channel. All of the links are on satansplain.com. However you listen to the show or follow us, please give us a like and subscribe where applicable. Magistra Templi Rex Blanche Barton wrote an essay that was originally published in The Black Flame in 1995 and made available online in 2001. And I'm just going to finish off the episode with a reading of this. How it fits into what I said about schooling and satanic third sides, well, it should become obvious. Mandatory Education, Teaching Pigs to Sing. That is the title. The article starts with the old saying, "Never try to teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and annoys the pig." One near universal I've heard in talking to hundreds of Satanists is their rage at conventional education. Even if they were successful and made good grades in school, they feel their real learning took place outside the classroom, resenting the hours of time wasted fidgeting behind desks. An equal number of us were dragged kicking and screaming through the diploma mill, labeled mentally slow, habitually truant, violent, attention deficit, or hyperactive, with all instinctive passion for learning systematically crushed out. Many young Satanists are still serving their 12-year sentences, feeling alien, angry, and alone. There is a good reason for our deep-seated disdain for and resistance to mandatory education. It goes against every principle of Satanism. It is not your imagination. Schools are designed to make you complacent, homogenized, and to extinguish any spark or curiosity or willfulness you may possess. The structure and attitudes presently used to impose education on children developed around the time of the Industrial Revolution. Since factories required workers to be minimally educated so that they could run machines without chopping their hands off, a system quickly evolved that would be the best training for dutiful 9-to-5 laborers. Children were constrained to receive an assembly line education with appropriate information shoved into their heads by the particular worker at a particular station, and after a designated time, were spit out on the other end like so many radios. Today, children are still taught the moral value of getting up at 7 a.m. every morning, going to a place you don't want to be, with a lot of people you'd consider your inferiors, to take instructions from someone you can't respect. This trains you to be a responsible citizen who will contribute to the workforce without grumbling, questioning, or inciting to riot. Despite public cant, our schools and our society in general don't support learning. We pay lip service to respecting education, but we don't reward it materially. Drug dealers, rock stars, and baseball players get the money and the glory. You don't necessarily make more money if you're smarter or work harder in school. Consequently, schools are no longer expected to teach basic skills. Modern American public schools are battle zones, not just gun battles over drugs, but battles over political agendas, religious indoctrinations, morality, and values. Nothing is exempt. Perceived political implication, history textbooks, science texts, library books, students' rights, multilingual education, offensive or insensitive language, teachers' own sexual orientation or political leanings all become more important than reading, writing, and arithmetic. The most basic objective facts are sacrificed to politics. The whole concept of objectivity is considered to be a false construct designed to repress multicultural diversity. Education is an incidental and bitter pill shoved down the throats of unwilling, unmotivated captives by teachers who are afraid to fail students, for fear they'll be accused of racism or have their tires slashed, or both. Kids don't expect to be challenged to perform, memorize, or demonstrate competence anymore. More public school students would be insulted if they were suddenly compelled to compete with the level of scholastic tasks expected of children in the 1930s or 1940s. We've all been inundated with depressing statistics about declining literacy rates, how American high school graduates can't locate China on a globe, or even know what a globe is. College educators complain that students arrive in their hallowed halls unprepared, without the most basic writing or math skills. I don't blame individual teachers. They're overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated. They are expected to dodge bullets in students' fists to impose intelligence on their charges, just as doctors are expected to magically impose health on uncooperative patients. People who become teachers are usually idealistic and driven. They certainly aren't drawn to the field for the money. But between the petty administrative politics, Overcrowded classes, belligerent students, endless rules, and the increasingly dangerous environment, many of the best teachers find themselves burning out, abandoning their professions. The established methods clearly are not working, so why isn't tax-supported mandatory education being challenged? Modifications are debated, more testing and stricter graduation qualifications are decreed, yes. Even vouchers have been proposed to satisfy mandatory education requirements, which would allow each student a certain amount of tax money to be used on a school of his choice. If kids need to be caged in minimum security prisons while their parents work, I don't mind spending tax dollars to do it, but the hypocrisy offends me. Let's not go through the pretense of hiring teachers and expecting them to act as unarmed guards. Let's not go through the motions of buying textbooks and building on-campus libraries where the most intellectually valuable books are debated off the shelves anyway. Don't shove kids who really do want to learn something in with the shit disturbers. Qualified teachers should teach where they'll be appreciated, where they can communicate their enthusiasm for knowledge to children who are eager to learn. Let's hire guards and babysitters to minister the needs of the kids who are proud of their stupidity. Kids don't want to be in school, parents don't want to be involved with their children's learning, so why force it on them? As with drug laws, let people choose to be satisfied, as long as they are also compelled to suffer the consequences, and defensive reaction that dissenters might impose upon their so-called indulgence. But no one offers the bold step of eliminating compulsory school attendance altogether. Why not? Not because we want children to learn anything, because free education has become big business, supporting a whole web of unions, bureaucracies, publishers, and special interests. And any shrewd Satanist will tell you that if big business and or big government is giving you something for free, you'd better listen for the time bomb ticking inside the pretty package. The brainwashing isn't even ineptly masked anymore. Corporations have stepped in to help fund public schools by donating educational materials in the form of videotape lessons, complete with the assolative pacing the Nintendo generation has come to expect, splashy attention-grabbing graphics, and of course advertisements for the company's products discreetly sprinkled in. These are powerful forces who want more authority over how we live our lives, who want to undermine couples and families, and want increasing control over our children's minds from an earlier and earlier age. Parents are urged to enroll their diapered toddlers in early childhood education classes, and child daycare programs begin when mothers return to their jobs, sometimes only a few months after giving birth. Any repressive interests know how important it is to mold children's minds to their agendas, and how to diffuse any independent impulses before they ignite independence in others. Teaching our own. In light of the abysmal non-education kids get in public school, Christians have always had the option of sending their children to parochial school. Since we don't want our children indoctrinated with Christianity, Satanists seem to naturally gravitate to one solution: homeschooling. It's a vision many of us carry from school days when we were thrown onto a playground of tedious, dull-witted savages. Some Satanists have been homeschooling their children for years. Others are sending their kids to public school with a wait-and-see attitude, vowing to spring them at the first sign of induced befuddlement. Our attitudes towards mandatory education grow inevitably out of the same disdain we feel for other aspects of institutionalized life. Unlike other religious groups who increasingly advocate homeschooling, Satanists object to public schools not just because of imposed religiosity, as Christianity per se or in the guise of multiculturalism, but we resent the presumption of homogenized thought and method. Every child is expected to learn the same thing at the same time, in the same way, regardless of interest, personal pacing, or learning style. How can one teacher, it would be asked, be expected to cater to the individual learning needs of 30 to 35 people? They shouldn't have to. It's unrealistic, especially in this hypersensitive climate, when there are more diverse cultures than ever before blending into the same classrooms, and teachers are expected to walk a tight wire, communicating values that won't offend anyone. If public schools can't fulfill the needs of the majority, how can we expect them to teach our children? They can't even teach in one language. In all fairness, we are a minority religion with values, priorities, and a mythic context that is far from the mainstream. We would probably be just as frustrated by a mandatory curriculum in 1945 as one in 1995. For Satanists, the problem is as much the method as the content. Homeschooling, on the other hand, offers many advantages to Satanists, and it seems to fit easily into an ideal lifestyle most of us would adopt given the opportunity. Modern technology is diabolically enabling us to fulfill those ideals. Satanists, with or without children, naturally try to arrange their lives so that they can work outside the mainstream, choosing a creative field, commissioned work, or a position in which they can do most of the work freelance or independently. The computer network revolution has been a great boon to Satanists and non-Satanists who are most productive working out of home offices. In the coming century, working at home will be the rule rather than the exception for certain professions. The sharp line between home and work will no longer exist. A flexible schedule will mean people can work, learn, or socialize at 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. if they are so inclined. Women will no longer be torn between their professional and domestic lives. Both men and women will have an opportunity to do both, weaving work and home and children together more comfortably than they can now. Satanists are driven people. We don't need children to complete our lives as our identity or as our sole creative expression, but if you're in a stable relationship and your compulsion to have children finally outweighs your reservations, it will mean that you and your partner should realistically evaluate the resources children demand. The biggest drains are not financial, but on stores of patience, humor, and primarily time. Having a child is a time-consuming proposition. If reasoning Satanists are going to make the commitment to have a child, they'd want one parent at home caring for the child full-time, at least until we can get some of those fabled satanic daycare centers going. If at least one parent is going to be home anyway, the teaching will come naturally and constantly. That doesn't mean that the at-home parent can't work as well, at least part-time. It's good for children to see both parents involved in their own pursuits. Satanism is ideally suited to homeschooling, though we'll have to discover the how through impulse, intuition, and trial and error. Some of the whys are readily apparent. 1. One major criticism people often lob at homeschooling is that the children don't have the opportunity to socialize with other children their own age. They always use that same word. Your children will be isolated, we're cautioned, unable to relate to others, and miss out on the proms, the football games, graduation, and all the events that all the other kids will be a part of. This criticism is invalid in general. Kids socialize every day. It's unavoidable. They interact with their parents, siblings, grocers, mailmen, other children in the neighborhood, their parents' friends, and their children. For Satanists, it's even less of a problem. Socialization is exactly what we would view as harmful to our children. Public school brainwashes them to be mindlessly violent, unquestioning of authority, unimaginative, and easily brainwashed by peers and packagers. They study not to satisfy their own curiosity, but to gain approval from some arbitrary authority who will label them an A or an F person. Point number 2. Homeschoolers are often accused of being isolationists and elitists. Christian or liberal advocates often feel compelled to apologize for their stance or go through long-winded explanations justifying their decisions. Satanists would proudly plead guilty. We don't have to apologize. We already bear the devil's name. We are elitists and want our children to grow up proud and strong. Point number 3. Most Satanists would feel that children learn better when they are allowed to learn at their own pace, following their own obsessions. Smart kids consider school boring and stultifying. Learning should be student-centered, allowing the child to generate his own enthusiasm. That can't be done in an education factory. If, according to some bureaucrat study, a child should know how to read by the age of 4 and do arithmetic by age 6, then they'd better all know how to do that, or they'll be labeled learning disabled. Children's early development, crawling, walking, teething, talking, toilet training, has a wide range of what's considered normal progress. But all of that is supposed to come to a screeching halt when they enter school. They have to learn how to read, do arithmetic, write, comprehend, all within a strict universal timetable. No more left to the individual child's initiative and exploration. By constantly being told what to learn, where to go, how high to jump, the child is robbed of the opportunity to develop his own self-discipline as well. School institutionalizes and sabotages the mind, short-circuits independent will, which is what it's designed to do. Point number 4. Homeschooling eliminates the dividing line between home, where you play, eat, sleep, and fight with your siblings, and school, where you are to do as little work as you can to get a good grade. Learning doesn't only happen between the hours of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. That presupposition undermines the very curiosity and sense of wonder that children are born with. Learning doesn't stop when you're 18 years old either, and there's a vast smorgasbord of subjects we'd love to explore or review ourselves. What better way to do it than to share that excitement egotistically with your own offspring? Working, playing, learning, thinking, and living should all be threads of the same seamless tapestry. Point number 5. Satanism is antithetical to enthroned lies. Most of what is now taught in public school is either erroneous or severely slanted in order to mollify special interest pressures. If a child can have an opportunity to examine facts presented as objectively as possible, he is better equipped to reason for himself and challenge irrationality when he sees it. Satanists have strong values that we want to communicate to our children. Those values are not available in public school. You can't be sure your child is getting the kind of public input you would want him to have unless you do it yourself. Instead of being indoctrinated into a fascistic political agenda, satanic education would emphasize what was once considered well-rounded literacy. A broad knowledge and application of art, architecture, geography, literature, music, world history, cinema, languages, mathematics, theater, sciences, etc., is vastly more important to a satanic priest than lessons in multicultural sensitivity. Or for that matter, memorizing the Lesser Key of Solomon and tracing the sigils from Avon Book's Necronomicon. A classical curriculum might revive in us some of the magical powers of discernment and discrimination most of us have lost. Don't tolerate pretentiousness. When a woman brags that she's getting a degree in women's studies, you can smile sweetly and say, as one of our priestesses did recently, "Oh, great, you mean cooking and cleaning and balancing a budget. I'm so glad modern women are taking an interest in home economics." Point number 6. Homeschooling establishes family/clan unity. Children see their siblings and parents as co-learners, recognizing their strengths and foibles, not divided against each other along arbitrary lines of age or sex. Satanists are, by definition, the quote-unquote others, the outsiders, not by posture but by birthright. Smart, independent, creative children are always aliens in society. We can find strength in ourselves and in others like us, namely our family and our extended satanic family. Also, we have a network of knowledgeable, influential people among us, and as our children grow, we could develop a potent web of mentoring and apprenticeship opportunities among ourselves. Point number 7. We don't want to send our children onto the battlefield before they're mature enough to know there's a war going on and to have the ammunition to fight it. Many of the most satanic principles preempt problems that public education seems to find insurmountable. Sex education, AIDS education, drugs, birth control, violence in the media, guns on campus, censorship of study materials, interracial conflicts. We should not have to subject our children to problems they wouldn't have if the school and the TV god didn't construct them as problems. We want our kids to learn, not waste time. Our ideal would be to teach our children to be strong-willed enough to see through the bullshit in society before they are bombarded with it. Many of us found the school playground to be a painful battlefield, not because of drugs or guns, but because we hated interacting with other kids. Satanic children are naturally set upon by other children and by insecure teachers. They are bound to be brighter and more aggressive toward the status quo by nature because that's what they'll be learning at home from their satanic parents. That's what being a Satanist is, and our children shouldn't have to suffer for asking uncomfortable questions. And finally, point number 8, much of homeschooling is religiously motivated, and ours is really nonetheless so, in the sense that our religion dictates our priorities and values. Many Mormons have been trying to educate their children at home for years, some dying in gun battles because of it. Catholics started their own system of private schools instead of allowing the children to be exposed to ideas without papal approval. Modern born-again Christians want to keep their kids away from a liberal humanist evolutionist agenda. Unlike others, however, Satanism is a religion uniquely qualified to advocate home learning. Our religion is not antithetical to rationality. On the contrary, Satanism encourages intellectual challenge. Faith and self-deceit are our enemies. We want our children to be free to question all things, not shackle their minds to any one view. Concerned non-Satanists who learn about our religion only through talk show hype, who would fear that we would indoctrinate our children into Satanism, have less to worry about with us than with Christianity. Since our religion isn't dependent on dogma and blind faith, no indoctrination is necessary. Our attitudes about life, animals, magic, success, Satan, science will inevitably seep in through our opinions and example. A child should be free to explore anything he's drawn to. Even Christianity can be examined as the dominant mythic contest, cultural anthropology in action. And finally, whose kids are these anyway? You'd think the right to educate your own children would be a basic inalienable one, but it's not. Any empowerment of individuals is hotly resisted by teachers' unions and the grand bureaucracy that depends on mandatory education. That's why such groups lobby for prohibition or severe restriction of homeschooling. It would lower their ADA, average daily attendance. Fewer students in school, fewer teachers hired. Besides, in today's climate of professional experts in all fields, we are programmed to feel incapable of teaching our own children. Quote-unquote, they say you can't possibly be qualified to teach your own children, and we're trained to believe them. Such important matters should be left to the experts. At the same time, legislators, reacting to demands from their constituencies to improve education, have enacted stricter national standardization tests in public schools. That trickles down to imposing similar demands on homeschooling families, which undermines their most positive strength, being able to gauge the pacing and content of studies to each individual child. Some homeschoolers feel a legitimate responsibility to keep their fingers on the political pulse, sounding the alarm if they perceive negative trends. Homeschooling today is not in most states the illegal activity it was 10 years ago. Laws vary from state to state, with different requirements for periodic tests, curriculum submissions, certifications, and various other paperwork. But at best, home learning is tolerated as an unorthodox alternative. No one has reliable statistics on exactly how many homeschooling families there are. That's the way they want it. But it's clear that the level of public education has reached such a nadir that many intelligent people are opting for homeschooling now only because the average parents begin to suspect their children would learn more just by staying home and reading or watching television. It's become an increasingly important plank in the religious right political platform. Gordon Liddy has advocated it on his syndicated radio show. The home PC has opened worlds of learning possibilities for everyman. Learning CDs, textbooks, entire mail-order curriculums are now available from publishers recognizing a burgeoning homeschooling market, making it a more accessible option than ever before. You can tell this article was written before widespread use of the internet. Going on, the current homeschooling explosion could create some strange bedfellows. Not all homeschoolers are Christian, but they are a strong faction, along with an articulate backbone of politically avid, atheistic/humanistic iconoclasts. This latter influence has a heritage in the educational libertines who started several alternative colleges and schools in the wake of the 1960s. Many of these were based on nonconformist ideas about self-initiated or student-centered learning, written evaluations instead of grades, co-learners instead of teachers, an emphasis on process over product, schools without walls, that means learning in the community, and learning how to learn. They are largely atheistic or humanistic and have the same kind of disdain for education factories that we do. It seems that the secular and Christian homeschooling factions have been able to set religion and politics aside, working toward preserving their children's rights to learn. A tenor of mutually beneficial separatism seems to pervade most home learning literature. Most have also tried not to develop a dictatorship within the homeschooling movement. There is no right way or one absolute authority. They recognize the strength of homeschooling is in the diversity of motivation, content, and methods for each individual family, much as Satanism is protected from big money exploitation by having our altars in our homes instead of in great cathedrals. Should we, as a point of satanic policy, decide to be vocal homeschooling advocates, it will be interesting to see if our support is enthusiastically integrated. Not all Satanists will be economically free enough to have one partner at home teaching their children, or to be able to make the compromises necessary to arrange their lives to do so. If you can't, then have as much influence on and involvement in your child's learning as possible. Teach him not to take everything he's taught in school as absolute truth. Any negative judgments about his abilities should be taken with reservation. Those satanic children who do go to public or private schools will be interesting experiments in themselves. Their willful enthusiasm will be labeled disruptive or gifted, as a homogenizing system tries to categorize a race of children genetically and environmentally antagonistic to homogenization. And that's going to do it for this episode of Satansplain. Thanks for listening. Hail Satan. You have been listening to Satansplain. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and subscribe where available. For more information on the show, visit Satansplain.com. And to learn more about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2022, Magistra Bill M.